Matt Ducey.
Very much, Mr Chair. Earlier in this debate, Mr Chair, the Labor member Poto Williams made a comment and a statement and a question. How do people in Canterbury feel about that? Well, I can tell you, Mr Speaker, how they feel about that. This national government won the party vote in every electorate in Christchurch and every electorate in Canterbury. And the reason was that because they believed in us and they trusted us, Mr Speaker, and the first chance we've had to repay in that trust and in that belief was this budget, 2015, the budget of working for New Zealand, a budget 2015 that is working for Canterbury, and a budget 2015 that's working for my electorate of Waimakariri, Mr Speaker. That member spoke about Housing New Zealand. Well, she needs to get out of her office and go and talk to Housing New Zealand, because I went to Housing New Zealand to listen about their update of rebuilding and repairing 5,000 houses and 700 homes. There was no opposition member of Parliament at that event. They hadn't even bothered to turn up, Mr Speaker. So I've listened to the appropriations around social housing, and I've met with them at Housing New Zealand, and it's great to hear that in Waimak we will end up with more houses, more Housing New Zealand houses post-earthquake than we had pre-earthquake. And in this debate, Mr Speaker, we heard from Derek Bull. And unfortunately for him, for New Zealand First, he couldn't talk about social housing. The reason was because New Zealand First voted down the social housing reforms. And those social housing appropriations, that will give 3,500 New Zealanders, extra New Zealanders, access to social housing. And those social housing appropriation, the social housing reform, that will give extra wraparound services to vulnerable Kiwis, giving them support around mental health, giving them support about alcohol and drug, support of education, training and employment. That's why he couldn't talk about social housing appropriation. Also, New Zealand First couldn't talk about children in hardship appropriations because they voted down that bill as well. A bill that will give working for families an extra $12 a week through that appropriations, Mr Speaker, and appropriations that will give beneficiary families up to $25 a week. They voted that down. They're not putting New Zealand first, they're putting themselves first, Mr Speaker. And can I congratulate this government, Mr Speaker, through their appropriations of targeted investment, Mr Speaker, because what we know through allocative efficiency, if we put money in, we can get better results out. And Mr Speaker, I'd like to take some time to talk about our youth services and what we know around that social investment approach, that if we put $1 in, we'll get $2.53 out through future liability. And that's what this budget is about, Mr Speaker. We know for the social development vote 2015, it's one of the biggest expenditures in this vote at about 25%, at about $25 billion. And it's right that this government is taking a social investment approach. We know with the youth service, putting $1 in, getting $2.53 out. And this is a group of vulnerable New Zealanders, Mr Speaker. 38% of them are being victims of domestic violence. 76% of them have been victims of emotional neglect, and 5% of them have been homeless and victims of sexual abuse, Mr Speaker. So it's right with this appropriations. We're investing in services that are making a difference in New Zealanders' lives. And that's what this government is doing, Mr Speaker. We're listening to New Zealanders. We're working hard for them. We are the party for the working people. And if we look at youth services, Mr Speaker, we know that through research, 86.5% of them, participants, are engaged in education, training and employment. Mr Speaker, when we're talking about Vote Social Development 2015, The reason we can invest $25 billion is because we've got a strong economy, we've got strong economic management and strong growth.